Chapter 6 of Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Harris. Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. Chapter 6. Necessary Practice. About the rest of all that winter I remember very little, being only a young boy then, and missing my father most out of doors, as when it came to the bird catching, or the tracking of hares in the snow, or the training of a sheepdog. Oftentimes I looked at his gun, an ancient piece found in the sea, a little below Glenthorne, and of which he was mighty proud, although it was only a matchlock, and I thought of the times I had held the fuse, while he got his aim at a rabbit, and once even at a red deer rubbing among the hazels. But nothing came of my looking at it, so far as I remember, save foolish tears of my own perhaps, till John Fry took it down one day from the hooks where father's hand had laid it, and it hurt me to see how John handled it, as if he had no memory. Bad job for he as her had not got thiccy that nate as her coom across them Doones. Racken varmer Jan ud a shown 'em the way to kingdom come, stead o' gooin herzelf zo aisy. And I might have been gooin to market now, stead of layin' banked up over yonner. Maister Jan, thee can zee the grave, if thee look alang this here goon burial. By now, what be blubberin' at? Wish I had never told thee. John Fry, I am not blubbering. You make a great mistake, John. You are thinking of little Annie. I cough sometimes in the winter weather, and father gives me liquorice. I mean he used to. Now let me have the gun, John. Thee have the goon, Jan. Thee isn't fit to put unto thy shoulder. What a weight her be for sure. Me not hold it, John. That shows how much you know about it. Get out of the way, John. You are opposite the mouth of it, and likely it is loaded. John Fry jumped in a livelier manner than when he was doing day work, and I rested the mouth on a cross rack piece, and felt a warm sort of surety that I could hit the door over opposite, or at least the cob wall alongside of it, and do no harm in the orchard. But John would not give me link or fuse, and on the whole I was glad of it, though carrying on as boys do, because I had heard my father say that the Spanish gun kicked like a horse, and because the load in it came from his hand, and I did not like to undo it. But I never found it kick very hard, and firmly set to the shoulder, unless it was badly loaded. In truth, the thickness of the metal was enough almost to astonish one, and what our people said about it may have been true enough, although most of them are such liars, at least, they make mistakes, as all mankind must do. Perchance it was no mistake at all to say that this ancient gun had belonged to a noble Spaniard, the captain of a fine large ship in the Invincible Armada, which we of England managed to conquer, with God and the weather helping us, 100 years ago or more, I can't say to a month or so. After a little while, when John had fired away at a rat the charge I held so sacred, it came to me as a natural thing to practice shooting with that great gun, instead of John Fry's blunderbuss, which looked like a bell with a stalk to it. Perhaps for a boy there is nothing better than a good windmill to shoot at, as I have seen them in flat countries, but we have no windmills upon the great moorland. Yet here and there a few barn doors, where shelter is, and away up the hollows. And up those hollows you can shoot, with the help of the sides to lead your aim, and there is a fair chance of hitting the door, if you lay your cheek to the barrel and try not to be afraid of it. Gradually I won such skill that I sent nearly all the lead gutter from the north porch of our little church through our best barn door, a thing which has often repented me since, especially as churchwarden, and made me pardon many bad boys. But father was not buried on that side of the church. But all this time, while I was roving over the hills or about the farm, and even listening to John Fry, my mother, being so much older and feeling trouble longer, went about inside the house, or among the maids and fowls, not caring to talk to the best of them, except when she broke out sometimes about the good master they had lost, all and every one of us. But the fowls would take no notice of it, except to cluck for barley, and the maidens, though they had liked him well, were thinking of their sweethearts as the spring came on. Mother thought it wrong of them, selfish and ungrateful, and yet sometimes she was proud that none had such call as herself to grieve for him. Only Annie seemed to go softly in and out, and cry, with nobody along of her, chiefly in the corner where the bees are and the grindstone. But somehow she would never let anybody behold her, being set, as you may say, to think it over by herself, and season it with weeping. Many times I caught her, and many times she turned upon me, and then I could not look at her, but asked how long to dinner time. Now in the depth of the winter month, such as we call December, father being dead and quiet in his grave a fortnight, it happened me to be out of powder for practice against his enemies. I had never fired a shot without thinking, "This for father's murderer," and John Fry said that I made such faces it was a wonder the gun went off. But though I could hardly hold the gun, unless with my back against a bar, it did me good to hear it go off, and hope to have hitten his enemies. "Oh, mother, mother!" I said that day, directly after dinner, while she was sitting looking at me, and almost ready to say, as now she did 7 times in a week, "How like your father you are growing! Jack, come here and kiss me." "Oh, mother, if you only knew how much I want a shilling!" "Jack, you shall never want a shilling, while I am alive to give thee one. But what is it for, dear heart?" "To buy something over at Porlock, mother. Perhaps I will tell you afterwards. If I tell not, it will be for your good, and for the sake of the children." Bless the boy, one would think he was 80 years of age at least. "Give me a little kiss, you Jack, and you shall have the shilling." For I hated to kiss or be kissed in those days, and so all honest boys must do, when God puts any strength in them. But now I wanted the powder so much, that I went and kissed mother very shyly, looking round the corner first, for Betty not to see me. But mother gave me 6 and only 1 shilling for all of them, and I could not find it in my heart to ask her for another, although I would have taken it. In very quick time I ran away with the shilling in my pocket, and got Peggy out on the Porlock road without my mother knowing it. For mother was frightened of that road now, as if all the trees were murderers, and would never let me go alone so much as 100 yards on it. And, to tell the truth, I was touched with fear for many years about it; and even now, when I ride at dark there, a man by a peat rick makes me shiver, until I go and collar him. But this time I was very bold, having John Fry's blunderbuss, and keeping a sharp lookout wherever any lurking place was. However, I saw only sheep and small red cattle, and the common deer of the forest, until I was nigh to Porlock town, and then rode straight to Mr. Pooke's, at the sign of the Spit and Gridiron. Mr. Pooke was asleep, as it happened, not having much to do that day, and so I fastened Peggy by the handle of a warming pan, at which she had no better manners than to snort and blow her breath, and in I walked with a manful style, bearing John Fry's blunderbuss. Now Timothy Pooke was a peaceful man, glad to live without any enjoyment of mind at danger, and I was tall and large already, as most lads of a riper age. Mr. Pooke, as soon as he opened his eyes, dropped suddenly under the counting board, and drew a great frying pan over his head, as if the Doones were come to rob him, as their custom was, mostly after the fair time. It made me feel rather hot and queer to be taken for a robber, and yet methinks I was proud of it. "Gadzooks, Master Pooke," said I, having learned fine words at Tiverton, "do you suppose that I know not then the way to carry firearms? And it were the old Spanish matchlock in the lieu of this good flint engine, which may be borne 10 miles or more, and never once go off, scarcely couldst thou seem more scared. I might point at thee muzzle on, just so as I do now, even for an hour or more, and like enough it would never shoot thee, unless I pulled the trigger hard, with a crock upon my finger. So you see, just so, Master Pooke, only a trifle harder." "God's sake, John Ridd, God's sake, dear boy," cried Pooke, knowing me by this time. "Don't 'ee, for good love now, don't 'ee show it to me, boy, as if I was to suck it. Put un down for good now, and thee shall have the very best of all is in the shop." "Ho!" I replied, with much contempt, and swinging round the gun, so that it fetched his hoop of candles down, all unkindled as they were. Ho! As if I had not attained to the handling of a gun yet! My hands are cold coming over the moors, else would I go bail to point the mouth at you for an hour, sir, and no cause for uneasiness. But in spite of all assurances, he showed himself desirous only to see the last of my gun and me. I dare say, villainous saltpetre, as the great playwright calls it, was never so cheap before nor since. For my shilling, Master Pooke afforded me 2 great packages, over large to go into my pockets, as well as a mighty chunk of lead, which I bound upon Peggy's withers. And as if all this had not been enough, he presented me with a roll of comfits for my sister Annie, whose gentle face and pretty manners won the love of everybody. There was still some daylight here and there as I rose the hill above Porlock, wondering whether my mother would be in a fright or would not know it. The 2 great packages of powder, slung behind my back, knocked so hard against one another that I feared they must either spill or blow up, and hurry me over Peggy's ears from the woolen cloth I rode upon. For father always liked a horse to have some wool upon his loins whenever he went far from home, and had to stand about, where one pleased, hot and wet and panting. And father always said that saddles were meant for men full grown and heavy and losing their activity, and no boy or young man on our farm durst ever get into a saddle, because they all knew that the master would chuck them out pretty quickly. As for me, I had tried it once, from a kind of curiosity, and I could not walk for 2 or 3 days, the leather galled my knees so. But now, as Peggy bore me bravely, snorting every now and then into a cloud of air, for the night was growing frosty, presently the moon arose over the shoulder of a hill, and the pony and I were half glad to see her, and half afraid of the shadows she threw, and the images all around us. I was ready at any moment to shoot at anybody, having great faith in my blunderbuss, but hoping not to prove it. And as I passed the narrow place where the Doones had killed my father, such a fear broke out upon me that I leaned upon the neck of Peggy, and shut my eyes, and was cold all over. However, there was not a soul to be seen, until we came home to the old farmyard, and there was my mother crying sadly, and Betty Muxworthy scolding. "Come along now," I whispered to Annie the moment supper was over, "and if you can hold your tongue, Annie, I will show you something." She lifted herself on the bench so quickly, and flushed so rich with pleasure, that I was obliged to stare hard away, and make Betty look beyond us. Betty thought I had something hid in the closet beyond the clock case, and she was the more convinced of it by reason of my denial. Not that Betty Muxworthy, or any one else for that matter, ever found me in a falsehood, because I never told one, not even to my mother, or, which is still a stronger thing, not even to my sweetheart, when I grew up to have one; but that Betty, being wronged in the matter of marriage a generation or 2 agone, by a man who came hedging and ditching, had now no mercy, except to believe that men from cradle to grave are liars, and women fools to look at them. When Betty could find no crime of mine, she knocked me out of the way in a minute, as if I had been nobody, and then she began to coax Mistress Annie, as she always called her, and draw the soft hair down her hands, and whisper into the little ears. Meanwhile dear mother was falling asleep, having been troubled so much about me, and Watch, my father's pet dog, was nodding closer and closer up into her lap. "Now, Annie, will you come?" I said, for I wanted her to hold the ladle for melting of the lead. "Will you come at once, Annie, or must I go for Lizzie, and let her see the whole of it?" "Indeed, then, you won't do that," said Annie. "Lizzie to come before me, John? And she can't stir a pot of brewis, and scarce knows a tongue from a ham, John, and says it makes no difference, because both are good to eat. Oh, Betty, what do you think of that to come of all her book learning?" "Thank God he can't say that of me," Betty answered shortly, for she never cared about argument, except on her own side. "Thank he, I says, every marnin' a'most, never to lead me astray so. Men is desavin', and so is gallanies; but the most desavin' of all is books, with their heads and tails, and the speckets in 'em, like a pig as have taken the maisles. Some folk pretends to laugh and cry over them. God forgive them for liars." It was part of Betty's obstinacy that she never would believe in reading, or the possibility of it, but stoutly maintained to the very last that people first learned things by heart, and then pretended to make them out from patterns done upon paper, for the sake of astonishing honest folk just as do the conjurers. And even to see the parson and clerk was not enough to convince her. All she said was, "It made no odds, they were all the same as the rest of us." And now that she had been on the farm nigh upon 40 years, and had nursed my father, and made his clothes, and all that he had to eat, and then put him in his coffin, she was come to such authority, that it was not worth the wages of the best man on the place to say a word in answer to Betty, even if he would face the risk to have 10 for 1, or 20. Annie was her love and joy. For Annie she would do anything, even so far as to try to smile, when the little maid laughed and danced to her. And in truth, I know not how it was, but every one was taken with Annie at the very first time of seeing her. She had such pretty ways and manners, and such a look of kindness, and a sweet soft light in her long blue eyes full of trustful gladness. Everybody who looked at her seemed to grow the better for it, because she knew no evil. And then the turn she had for cooking, you never would have expected it, and how it was her richest mirth to see that she had pleased you. I have been out on the world a vast deal, as you will own hereafter, and yet have I never seen Annie's equal for making a weary man comfortable. End of chapter 6. Recording by Michelle Harris.
Chapter 7 of Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. Chapter 7. Hard It Is to Climb. So many a winter night went by in a hopeful and pleasant manner, with the hissing of the bright round bullets cast into the water, and the spluttering of the great red apples which Annie was roasting for me. We always managed our evening's work in the chimney of the back kitchen, where there was room to set chairs and table in spite of the fire burning. On the right hand side was a mighty oven, where Betty threatened to bake us, and on the left long sides of bacon, made up of favoured pigs and growing very brown and comely. Annie knew the names of all, and ran up to the wood smoke every now and then, when a gentle memory moved her, and asked them how they were getting on, and when they would like to be eaten. Then she came back with foolish tears at thinking of that necessity, and I, being soft in a different way, would make up my mind against bacon. But, Lord bless you, it was no good. Whenever it came to breakfast time, after 3 hours upon the moors, I regularly forgot the pigs, but paid good heed to the rashers. For ours is a hungry county, if such there be in England, a place, I mean, where men must eat, and are quick to discharge the duty. The air of the moors is so shrewd and wholesome, stirring a man's recollection of the good things which have betided him, and whetting his hope of something still better in the future, that by the time he sits down to a cloth, his heart and stomach are tuned too well to say nay to one another. Almost everybody knows, in our part of the world at least, how pleasant and soft the fall of the land is round about Plover's Barrows farm. All above it is strong dark mountain, spread with heath, and desolate, but near our house the valleys cove and open warmth and shelter. Here are trees, and bright green grass, and orchards full of contentment, and a man may scarce espy the brook, although he hears it everywhere. And indeed a stout good piece of it comes through our farmyard, and swells sometimes to a rush of waves when the clouds are on the hilltops. But all below, where the valley bends and the Lynn stream comes along with it, pretty meadows slope their breast, and the sun spreads on the water. And nearly all of this is ours, till you come to Nicholas Snow's land. But about 2 miles below our farm, the Bagworthy water runs into the Lynn, and makes a real river of it. Thence it hurries away with strength and a force of wilful waters, under the foot of a barefaced hill, and so to rocks and woods again, where the stream is covered over, and dark heavy pools delay it. There are plenty of fish all down this way, and the farther you go the larger they get, having deeper grounds to feed in; and sometimes in the summer months, when mother could spare me off the farm, I came down here, with Annie to help, because it was so lonely, and caught well nigh a basketful of little trout and minnows, with a hook and a bit of worm on it, or a fern web, or a blowfly, hung from a hazel pulse stick. For of all the things I learnt at Blundell's, only two abode with me, and one of these was the knack of fishing, and the other the art of swimming. And indeed they have a very rude manner of teaching children to swim there, for the big boys take the little boys, and put them through a certain process, which they grimly call sheep washing. In the third meadow, from the gate of the school, going up the river, there is a fine pool in the Lowman, where the Taunton brook comes in, and they call it the Taunton pool. The water runs down with a strong sharp stickle, and then has a sudden elbow in it, where the small brook trickles in, and on that side the bank is steep, 4 or it may be 5 feet high, overhanging loamily; but on the other side it is flat, pebbly, and fit to land upon. Now the large boys take the small boys, crying sadly for mercy, and thinking mayhap of their mothers, with hands laid well at the back of their necks, they bring them up to the crest of the bank upon the eastern side, and make them strip their clothes off. Then the little boys, falling on their naked knees, blubber upwards piteously; but the large boys know what is good for them, and will not be entreated. So they cast them down, one after other, into the splash of the water, and watch them go to the bottom first, and then come up and fight for it, with a blowing and a bubbling. It is a very fair sight to watch, when you know there is little danger, because, although the pool is deep, the current is sure to wash a boy up on the stones, where the end of the depth is. As for me, they had no need to throw me more than once, because I jumped of my own accord, thinking small things of the Lowman, after the violent Lynn. Nevertheless I learned to swim there as all the other boys did, for the greatest point in learning that is to find that you must do it. I loved the water naturally, and could not long be out of it; but even the boys who hated it most came to swim in some fashion or other, after they had been flung for a year or two into the Taunton pool. But now, although my sister Annie came to keep me company, and was not to be parted from me by the tricks of the Lynn stream, because I put her on my back and carried her across wherever she could not leap it, or tuck up her things and take the stones, yet so it happened that neither of us had been up the Bagworthy water. We knew that it brought a good stream down, as full of fish as of pebbles, and we thought it must be very pretty to make a way where no way was, nor even a bullock came down to drink. But whether we were afraid or not, I am sure I cannot tell, because it is so long ago; but I think that had something to do with it. For Bagworthy water ran out of Doone Valley, a mile or so from the mouth of it. But when I was turned 14 years old, and had put into good small clothes, buckled at the knee, and strong blue worsted hosen knitted by my mother, it happened to me without choice, I may say, to explore the Bagworthy water. And it came about in this wise. My mother had long been ailing, and not well able to eat much, and there is nothing that frightens us so much as for people who have no love of their victuals. Now I chanced to remember that once at the time of the holidays I had brought dear mother from Tiverton a jar of pickled loaches, caught by myself in the Lowman river, and baked in the kitchen oven, with vinegar, a few leaves of bay, and about a dozen peppercorns. And mother had said that in all her life she had never tasted anything fit to be compared with them. Whether she said so good a thing out of compliment to my skill in catching the fish and cooking them, or whether she really meant it, is more than I can tell, though I quite believe the latter, and so would most people who tasted them. At any rate, I now resolved to get some loaches for her, and do them in the selfsame manner, just to make her eat a bit. There are many people, even now, who have not come to the right knowledge what a loach is, and where he lives, and how to catch and pickle him. And I will not tell them all about it, because if I did, very likely there would be no loaches left 10 or 20 years after the appearance of this book. A pickled minnow is very good if you catch him in a stickle with the scarlet fingers upon him, but I count him no more than the ropes in beer, compared with the loach done properly. Being resolved to catch some loaches, whatever trouble it cost me, I set forth without a word to any one, in the forenoon of St. Valentine's Day, 1675/6, I think it must have been. Annie should not come with me, because the water was too cold, for the winter had been long, and snow lay here and there in patches in the hollow of the banks, like a lady's gloves forgotten. And yet the spring was breaking forth, as it always does in Devonshire when the turn of the days is over, and though there was little to see of it, the air was full of feeling. It puzzles me now, that I remember all these young impressions so, because I took no heed of them at the time whatever; and yet they come upon me bright, when nothing else is evident in the grey fog of experience. I am like an old man gazing at the outside of his spectacles, and seeing, as he rubs the dust, the image of his grandson playing at bo peep with him. But let me be of any age, I never could forget that day, and how bitter cold the water was. For I doffed my shoes and hose, and put them in a bag about my neck, and left my little coat at home, and tied my shirt sleeves back to my shoulders. Then I took a 3-pronged fork firmly bound to a rod with cord, and a piece of canvas kerchief, with a lump of bread inside it, and so went into the pebbly water, trying to think how warm it was. For more than a mile, all down the Lynn stream, scarcely a stone I left unturned, being thoroughly skilled in the tricks of the loach, and knowing how he hides himself. For being grey spotted and clear to see through, and something like a cuttlefish, only more substantial, he will stay quite still where a streak of weed is in the rapid water, hoping to be overlooked, not caring even to wag his tail. Then, being disturbed, he flips away like whalebone from the finger, and hies to a shelf of stone, and lies with his sharp head poked in under it. Or sometimes he bellies him into the mud, and only shows his back ridge. And that is the time to spear him nicely, holding the fork very gingerly, and allowing for the bent of it, which comes to pass I know not how, at the tickle of air and water. Or, if your loach should not be abroad when first you come to look for him, but keeping snug in his little home, then you may see him come forth amazed at the quivering of the shingles, and awe himself and look at you, and then dart upstream like a little grey streak, and then you must try to mark him in, and follow very daintily. So after that, in a sandy place, you steal up behind his tail to him, so that he cannot set eyes on you, for his head is upstream always, and there you see him abiding still, clear and mild and affable. Then, as he looks so innocent, you make full sure to prog him well, in spite of the wry of the water, and the sun making elbows to everything, and the trembling of your fingers. But when you gird at him lovingly, and have as good as gotten him, lo, in the go-by of the river he is gone as a shadow goes, and only a little cloud of mud curls away from the points of the fork. A long way down that limpid water, chill and bright as an iceberg, went my little self that day on man's choice errand, destruction. All the young fish seemed to know that I was one who had taken out God's certificate, and meant to have the value of it. Every one of them was aware that we desolate more than replenish the earth. For a cow might come and look into the water, and put her yellow lips down; a kingfisher, like a blue arrow, might shoot through the dark alleys over the channel, or sit on a dipping withy bough with his beak sunk into his breast feathers. Even an otter might float down stream, likening himself to a log of wood, with his flat head flush with the water top, and his oily eyes peering quietly. And yet no panic would seize other life, as it does when a sample of man comes. Now let not any one suppose that I thought of these things when I was young, for I knew not the way to do it. And proud enough in truth I was at the universal fear I spread in all those lonely places, where I myself must have been afraid if anything had come up to me. It is all very pretty to see the trees big with their hopes of another year, though dumb as yet on the subject, and the waters murmuring gaiety, and the banks spread out with comfort. But a boy takes none of this to heart, unless he be meant for a poet, which God can never charge upon me, and he would liefer have a good apple, or even a bad one if he stole it. When I had travelled 2 miles or so, conquered now and then with cold, and coming out to rub my legs into a lively friction, only fishing here and there because of the tumbling water, suddenly in an open space, where meadows spread about it, I found a good stream flowing softly into the body of our brook. And it brought, so far as I could guess by the sweep of it under my knee caps, a larger power of clear water than the Lynn itself had. Only it came more quietly down, not being troubled with stairs and steps as the fortune of the Lynn is, but gliding smoothly and forcibly, as if upon some set purpose. Hereupon I drew up and thought, and reason was much inside me, because the water was bitter cold, and my little toes were aching. So on the bank I rubbed them well with a sprout of young sting nettle, and having skipped about a while, was kindly inclined to eat a bit. Now all the turn of all my life hung upon that moment. But as I sat there munching a crust of Betty Muxworthy's sweet brown bread, and a bit of cold bacon along with it, and kicking my little red heels against the dry loam to keep them warm, I knew no more than fish under the fork what was going on over me. It seemed a sad business to go back now and tell Annie there were no loaches, and yet it was a frightful thing, knowing what I did of it, to venture where no grown man durst up the Bagworthy water. And please to recollect that I was only a boy in those days, fond enough of anything new, but not like a man to meet it. However, as I ate more and more, my spirit arose within me, and I thought of what my father had been, and how he had told me 100 times never to be a coward. And then I grew warm, and my little heart was ashamed of its pitter-patting, and I said to myself, now if father looks, he shall see that I obey him. So I put my bag round my back again, and buckled my breeches far up from the knee, expecting deeper water, and crossing the Lynn, went stoutly up under the branches which hang so dark on the Bagworthy river. I found it strongly overwoven, turned and torn with thicket wood, but not so rocky as the Lynn, and more inclined to go evenly. There were bars of chafed stakes stretched from the sides half way across the current, and light outriders of pithy weed, and blades of last year's water-grass trembling in the quiet places, like a spider's threads, on the transparent stillness with a tint of olive moving it. And here and there the sun came in, as if his light was sifted, making dance upon the waves and shadowing the pebbles. Here, although affrighted often by the deep dark places, and feeling that every step I took might never be taken backward, on the whole I had very comely sport of loaches, trout, and minnows, forking some and tickling some, and driving others to shallow nooks, whence I could bail them ashore. Now if you have ever been fishing, you will not wonder that I was led on, forgetting all about danger, and taking no heed of the time, but shouting in a childish way whenever I caught a whacker, as we called a big fish at Tiverton. And in sooth there were very fine loaches here, having more lie and harbourage than in the rough Lynn stream, though not quite so large as in the Lowman, where I have even taken them to the weight of half a pound. But in answer to all my shouts, there was never any sound at all, except of a rocky echo, or a scared bird hustling away, or the sudden dive of a water-vole, and the place grew thicker and thicker, and the covert grew darker above me, until I thought that the fishes might have a good chance of eating me, instead of my eating the fishes. For now the day was falling fast behind the brown of the hilltops, and the trees, being void of leaf and hard, seemed giants ready to beat me. And every moment, as the sky was clearing up for a white frost, the cold of the water got worse and worse, until I was fit to cry with it. And so, in a sorry plight, I came to an opening in the bushes, where a great black pool lay in front of me, whitened with snow, as I thought, at the sides, till I saw it was only foam froth. Now, though I could swim with great ease and comfort, and feared no depth of water, when I could fairly come to it, yet I had no desire to go over head and ears into this great pool, being so cramped and weary, and cold enough in all conscience, though wet only up to the middle, not counting my arms and shoulders. And the look of this black pit was enough to stop one from diving into it, even on a hot summer's day, with sunshine on the water, I mean if sun ever shone there. As it was, I shuddered and drew back, not alone at the pool itself and the black air there was about it, but also at the whirling manner, and wisping of white threads upon it in stripy circles round and round, and the centre still as jet. But soon I saw the reason of the stir and depth of that great pit, as well as of the roaring sound which long had made me wonder. For skirting round one side, with very little comfort, because the rocks were high and steep, and the ledge at the foot so narrow, I came to a sudden sight and marvel, such as I never dreamed of. For lo! I stood at the foot of a long pale slide of water, coming smoothly to me without any break or hindrance, for 100 yards or more, and fenced on either side with cliff, sheer and straight and shining. The water neither ran nor fell, nor leaped with any spouting, but made one even slope of it, as if it had been combed or planed, and looking like a plank of deal laid down a deep black staircase. However, there was no side rail, nor any place to walk upon, only the channel a fathom wide, and the perpendicular walls of crag shutting out the evening. The look of this place had a sad effect, scaring me very greatly, and making me feel that I would give something only to be at home again, with Annie cooking my supper, and our dog Watch sniffing upward. But nothing would come of wishing, that I had long found out, and it only made one the less inclined to work without White Feather. So I laid the case before me in a little council, not for loss of time, but only that I wanted rest, and to see things truly. Then says I to myself, John Ridd, these trees, and pools, and lonesome rocks, and the setting of the sunlight, are making a gruesome coward of thee. Shall I go back to my mother so, and be called her fearless boy? Nevertheless, I am free to own that it was not any fine sense of shame which settled my decision, for indeed there was nearly as much danger in going back as in going on, and perhaps even more of labour, the journey being so roundabout. But that which saved me from turning back was a strange inquisitive desire, very unbecoming in a boy of little years. In a word, I would risk a great deal to know what made the water come down like that, and what there was at the top of it. Therefore, seeing hard strife before me, I girt up my breeches anew, with each buckle one hole tighter, for the sodden straps were stretching and giving, and mayhap my legs were grown smaller from the coldness of it. Then I bestowed my fish around my neck more tightly, and not stopping to look much for fear of fear, crawled along over the fork of the rocks, where the water had scooped the stone out, and shunning thus the ledge from whence it rose like the mane of a white horse into the broad black pool, softly I let my feet into the dip and rush of the torrent. And here I had reckoned without my host, although, as I thought, so clever, and it was much but that I went down into the great black pool, and had never been heard of more, and this must have been the end of me, except for my trusty loach fork. For the green wave came down like great bottles upon me, and my legs were gone off in a moment, and I had not time to cry out with wonder, only to think of my mother and Annie, and knock my head very sadly, which made it go round so that the brains were no good, even if I had any. But all in a moment, before I knew aught except that I must die out of the way with a roar of water upon me, my fork, praise God, stuck fast in the rock, and I was borne up upon it. I felt nothing, except that here was another matter to begin upon, and it might be worth while, or again it might not, to have another fight for it. But presently the dash of the water upon my face revived me, and my mind grew used to the roar of it, and meseemed I had been worse off than this, when first flung into the Lowman. Therefore I gathered my legs back slowly, as if they were fish to be landed, stopping whenever the water flew too strongly off my shin bones, and coming along without sticking out to let the wave get hold of me. And in this manner I won a footing, leaning well forward like a draught horse, and balancing on my strength, as it were, with the ashen stake set behind me. Then I said to myself, John Ridd, the sooner you get yourself out by the way you came, the better it will be for you. But to my great dismay and affright, I saw that no choice was left me now, except that I must climb somehow up that hill of water, or else be washed down into the pool and whirl around it till it drowned me. For there was no chance of fetching back by the way I had gone down into it, and further up was a hedge of rock on either side of the waterway, rising 100 yards in height, and for all I could tell 500, with no place to set a foot in. Having said the Lord's Prayer, which was all I knew, and made a very bad job of it, I grasped the good loach stick under a knot, and steadied me with my left hand, and so with a sigh of despair began my course up the fearful torrent way. To me it seemed half a mile at least of sliding water above me, but in truth it was little more than a furlong, as I came to know afterwards. It would have been a hard ascent, even without the slippery slime, and the force of the river over it, and I had scanty hope indeed of ever winning the summit. Nevertheless, my terror left me, now I was face to face with it, and had to meet the worst, and I set myself to do my best, with a vigour and a sort of hardness which did not then surprise me, but have done so ever since. The water was only 6 inches deep, or from that to 9 at the utmost, and all the way up I could see my feet looking white in the gloom of the hollow, and here and there I found a resting place to hold on by the cliff and pant a while. And gradually, as I went on, a warmth of courage breathed in me, to think that perhaps no other had dared to try that pass before me, and to wonder what my mother would say to it. And then came thought of my father also, and the pain of my feet abated. How I went carefully, step by step, keeping my arms in front of me, and never daring to straighten my knees, is more than I can tell clearly, or even like now to think of, because it makes me dream of it. Only I must acknowledge that the greatest danger of all was just where I saw no jeopardy, but ran up a patch of black ooze-weed in a very boastful manner, being now not far from the summit. Here I fell very piteously, and was like to have broken my kneecap, and the torrent got hold of my other leg while I was indulging the bruised one. And then a vile knotting of cramp disabled me, and for a while I could only roar, till my mouth was full of water, and all of my body was sliding. But the fright of that brought me to again, and my elbow caught in a rock hole, and so I managed to start again with the help of more humility. Now, being in the most dreadful fright because I was so near the top, and hope was beating within me, I laboured hard with both legs and arms, going like a mill and grunting. At last the rush of forked water, where first it came over the lips of the fall, drove me into the middle, and I stuck a while with my toe balls on the slippery links of the popweed, and the world was green and glittery, and I durst not look behind me. Then I made up my mind to die at last, for so my legs would ache no more, and my breath not pain my heart so. Only it did seem such a pity, after fighting so long, to give in, and the light was coming upon me, and again I fought towards it. Then suddenly I felt fresh air, and fell into it headlong. End of chapter 7. Read by Landy in Sydney, Australia, August 2008.
Chapter 8 of Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Harris. Lorna Doone by R. D. Blackmore. Chapter 8. A Boy and a Girl. When I came to myself again, my hands were full of young grass and mould, and a little girl kneeling at my side was rubbing my forehead tenderly with a dock leaf and a handkerchief. "Oh, I am so glad," she whispered softly as I opened my eyes and looked at her. "Now you will try to be better, won't you?" I had never heard so sweet a sound as came from between her bright red lips, while there she knelt and gazed at me. Neither had I ever seen anything so beautiful as the large dark eyes intent upon me, full of pity and wonder. And then, my nature being slow, and perhaps, for that matter, heavy, I wandered with my hazy eyes down the black shower of her hair, as to my jaded gaze it seemed. And where it fell on the turf, among it, like an early star, was the first primrose of the season. And since that day I think of her, through all the rough storms of my life, when I see an early primrose. Perhaps she liked my countenance, and indeed I know she did, because she said so afterwards, although at the time she was too young to know what made her take to me. Not that I had any beauty, or ever pretended to have any, only a solid healthy face, which many girls have laughed at. Thereupon I sat upright, with my little trident still in one hand, and was much afraid to speak to her, being conscious of my country brogue, lest she should cease to like me. but she clapped her hands and made a trifling dance around my back, and came to me on the other side, as if I were a great plaything. "What is your name?" she said, as if she had every right to ask me. "And how did you come here? And what are these wet things in this great bag?" "You had better let them alone," I said. "They are loaches for my mother. But I will give you some if you like." "Dear me, how much you think of them! Why, they are only fish. But how your feet are bleeding! Oh, I must tie them up for you. And no shoes nor stockings. Is your mother very poor, poor boy?" "No," I said, being vexed at this. "We are rich enough to buy all this great meadow, if we chose. And here my shoes and stockings be." "Why, they are quite as wet as your feet, and I cannot bear to see your feet. Oh, please let me manage them. I will do it very softly." "Oh, I don't think much of that," I replied. "I shall put some goose grease to them. But how you are looking at me! I never saw any one like you before. My name is John Ridd. What is your name?" "Lorna Doone," she answered in a low voice, as if afraid of it, and hanging her head so that I could see only her forehead and eyelashes. "If you please, my name is Lorna Doone, and I thought you must have known it." Then I stood up and touched her hand, and tried to make her look at me, but she only turned away the more. Young and harmless as she was, her name alone made guilt of her. Nevertheless, I could not help looking at her tenderly, and the more when her blushes turned into tears, and her tears to long low sobs. "Don't cry," I said, "whatever you do. I am sure you have never done any harm. I will give you all my fish, Lorna, and catch some more for mother. Only don't be angry with me." She flung her little soft arms up in the passion of her tears, and looked at me so piteously, that what did I do but kiss her? It seemed to be a very odd thing, when I came to think of it, because I hated kissing so, as all honest boys must do. But she touched my heart with a sudden delight, like a cowslip blossom, although there were none to be seen yet, and the sweetest flowers of spring. She gave me no encouragement, as my mother in her place would have done. Nay, she even wiped her lips, which methought was rather rude of her, and drew away, and smoothed her dress, as if I had used a freedom. Then I felt my cheeks grow burning red, and I gazed at my legs and was sorry. For although she was not at all a proud child, at any rate in her countenance, yet I knew that she was by birth 1,000 years in front of me. They might have taken and framed me, or, which would be more to the purpose, my sisters, until it was time for us to die, and then have trained our children after us, for many generations, yet never could we have gotten that look upon our faces which Lorna Doone had naturally, as if she had been born to it. Here was I, a yeoman's boy, a yeoman every inch of me, even where I was naked; and there was she, a lady born, and thoroughly aware of it, and dressed by people of rank and taste, who took pride in her beauty and set it to advantage. For though her hair was fallen down by reason of her wildness, and some of her frock was touched with wet where she had tended me so, behold her dress was pretty enough for the queen of all the angels. The colours were bright and rich indeed, and the substance very sumptuous, yet simple and free from tinsel stuff, and matching most harmoniously. All from her waist to her neck was white, plaited in close like a curtain, and the dark soft weeping of her hair, and the shadowy light of her eyes, like a wood rayed through with sunset, made it seem yet whiter, as if it were done on purpose. As for the rest, she knew what it was a great deal better than I did, for I never could look far away from her eyes, when they were opened upon me. Now, seeing how I heeded her, and feeling that I had kissed her, although she was such a little girl, 8 years old or thereabouts, she turned to the stream in a bashful manner, and began to watch the water, and rubbed one leg against the other. I, for my part, being vexed at her behaviour to me, took up all my things to go, and made a fuss about it, to let her know I was going. But she did not call me back at all, as I had made sure she would do. Moreover, I knew that to try the descent was almost certain death to me, and it looked as dark as pitch. And so at the mouth I turned around again, and came back to her and said, "Lorna." "Oh, I thought you were gone," she answered. "Why did you ever come here? Do you know what they would do to us if they found you here with me?" "Beat us, I dare say, very hard, or me at least. They could never beat you." "No, they would kill us both outright, and bury us here by the water. And the water often tells me that I must come to that." "But what should they kill me for?" "Because you have found the way up here, and they never could believe it. Now please to go, oh, please to go. They will kill us both in a moment. Yes, I like you very much," for I was teasing her to say it, "very much indeed, and I will call you John Ridd if you like, only please to go, John, and when your feet are well, you know, you can come and tell me how they are." "But I tell you, Lorna, I like you very much indeed, nearly as much as Annie, and a great deal more than Lizzie. And I never saw any one like you, and I must come back again to morrow, and so must you, to see me, and I will bring you such lots of things. There are apples still, and a thrush I caught with only one leg broken, and our dog has just had puppies. Oh dear, they won't let me have a dog. There is not a dog in the valley. They say they are such noisy things." "Only put your hand in mine. What little things they are, Lorna! And I will bring you the loveliest dog. I will show you just how long he is." "Hush!" A shout came down the valley, and all my heart was trembling, like water after sunset, and Lorna's face was altered from pleasant play to terror. She shrank to me, and looked up at me, with such a power of weakness, that I at once made up my mind to save her or to die with her. A tingle went through all my bones, and I only longed for my carbine. The little girl took courage from me, and put her cheek quite close to mine. "Come with me down the waterfall. I can carry you easily, and mother will take care of you." "No, no," she cried, as I took her up. "I will tell you what to do. They are only looking for me. You see that hole there?" She pointed to a little niche in the rock which verged the meadow, about 50 yards away from us. In the fading of the twilight I could just descry it. "Yes, I see it, but they will see me crossing the grass to get there." "Look, look!" She could hardly speak. "There is a way out from the top of it. They would kill me if I told it. Oh, here they come, I can see them." The little maid turned as white as the snow which hung on the rocks above her, and she looked at the water, and then at me, and she cried, "Oh dear, oh dear!" And then she began to sob aloud, being so young and unready. But I drew her behind the withy bushes, and close down to the water, where it was quiet and shelving deep, ere it came to the lip of the chasm. Here they could not see either of us from the upper valley, and might have sought a long time for us, even when they came quite near, if the trees had been clad with their summer clothes. Luckily I had picked up my fish, and taken my 3-pronged fork away. Crouching in that hollow nest, as children get together in ever so little compass, I saw a dozen fierce men come down, on the other side of the water, not bearing any firearms, but looking lax and jovial, as if they were come from riding, and a dinner taken hungrily. "Queen! Queen!" they were shouting, here and there, and now and then. "Where the pest is our little queen gone?" "They always call me Queen, and I am to be queen by and by," Lorna whispered to me, with her soft cheek on my rough one, and her little heart beating against me. "Oh, they are crossing by the timber there, and then they are sure to see us." "Stop," said I. "Now I see what to do. I must get into the water, and you must go to sleep." "To be sure, yes, away in the meadow there. But how bitter cold it will be for you." She saw in a moment the way to do it, sooner than I could tell her, and there was no time to lose. "Now mind you never come again," she whispered over her shoulder as she crept away, with a childish twist hiding her white front from me. "Only I shall come sometimes. Oh, here they are, Madonna!" Daring scarce to peep, I crept into the water, and lay down bodily in it, with my head between 2 blocks of stone, and some flood drift combing over me. The dusk was deepening between the hills, and a white mist lay on the river; but I, being in the channel of it, could see every ripple and twig and rush, and glazing of twilight above it, as bright as in a picture; so that to my ignorance there seemed no chance at all but what the men must find me. For all this time they were shouting and swearing, and keeping such a hullabaloo, that the rocks all round the valley rang, and my heart quaked so, what with this and the cold, that the water began to gurgle round me, and to lap upon the pebbles. Neither in truth did I try to stop it, being now so desperate, between the fear and the wretchedness, till I caught a glimpse of the little maid, whose beauty and whose kindliness had made me yearn to be with her, and then I knew that for her sake I was bound to be brave and hide myself. She was lying beneath a rock 30 or 40 yards from me, feigning to be fast asleep, with her dress spread beautifully, and her hair drawn over her. Presently one of the great rough men came round a corner upon her, and there he stopped and gazed awhile at her fairness and her innocence. Then he caught her up in his arms, and kissed her so that I heard him, and if I had only brought my gun, I would have tried to shoot him. "Here our queen is! Here's the queen! Here's the captain's daughter!" he shouted to his comrades. "Fast asleep, by God, and hearty! Now I have first claim to her, and no one else shall touch the child. Back to the bottle, all of you!" He set her dainty little form upon his great square shoulder, and her narrow feet in one broad hand, and so in triumph marched away, with the purple velvet of her skirt ruffling in his long black beard, and the silken length of her hair fetched out, like a cloud by the wind behind her. This way of her going vexed me so, that I leaped upright in the water, and must have been spied by some of them, but for their haste to the wine bottle. Of their little queen they took small notice, being in this urgency, although they had thought to find her drowned, but trooped away after one another with kindly challenge to gambling, so far as I could make them out, and I kept sharp watch, I assure you. Going up that darkened glen, little Lorna, riding still the largest and most fierce of them, turned and put up a hand to me, and I put up a hand to her, in the thick of the mist and the willows. She was gone, my little dear, though tall of her age and healthy, and when I got over my thriftless fright, I longed to have more to say to her. Her voice to me was so different from all I had ever heard before, as might be a sweet silver bell intoned to the small chords of a harp. But I had no time to think about this, if I hoped to have any supper. I crept into a bush for warmth, and rubbed my shivering legs on bark, and longed for mother's faggot. Then as daylight sank below the forget-me-not of stars, with a sorrow to be quit, I knew that now must be my time to get away, if there were any. Therefore, wringing my sodden breeches, I managed to crawl from the bank to the niche in the cliff which Lorna had shown me. Through the dusk I had trouble to see the mouth, at even the 5 land yards of distance; nevertheless, I entered well, and held on by some dead fern stems, and did hope that no one would shoot me. But while I was hugging myself like this, with a boyish manner of reasoning, my joy was like to have ended in sad grief both to myself and my mother, and haply to all honest folk who shall love to read this history. For hearing a noise in front of me, and like a coward not knowing where, but afraid to turn round or think of it, I felt myself going down some deep passage into a pit of darkness. It was no good to catch the sides, the whole thing seemed to go with me. Then, without knowing how, I was leaning over a night of water. This water was of black radiance, as are certain diamonds, spanned across with vaults of rock, and carrying no image, neither showing marge nor end, but centred, as it might be, with a bottomless indrawal. With that chill and dread upon me, and the sheer rock all around, and the faint light heaving wavily on the silence of this gulf, I must have lost my wits, and gone to the bottom, if there were any. But suddenly a robin sang, as they will do after dark towards spring, in the brown fern and ivy behind me. I took it for our little Annie's voice, for she could call any robin, and gathering quick warm comfort, sprang up the steep way towards the starlight. Climbing back, as the stones glid down, I heard the cold greedy wave go japping, like a blind black dog, into the distance of arches and hollow depths of darkness. End of chapter 8. Recording by Michelle Harris. Of Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Harris. Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. Chapter 9. There is no place like home. I can assure you, and tell no lie, as John Fry always used to say when telling his very largest, that I scrambled back to the mouth of that pit as if the evil one had been after me. And sorely I repented now of all my boyish folly, or madness it might well be termed, in venturing, with none to help, and nothing to compel me, into that accursed valley. Once let me get out, thinks I, and if ever I get in again, without being cast in by neck and by crop, I will give our new-born donkey leave to set up for my schoolmaster. How I kept that resolution we shall see hereafter. It is enough for me now to tell how I escaped from the den that night. First I sat down in the little opening which Lorna had pointed out to me, and wondered whether she had meant, as bitterly occurred to me, that I should run down into the pit and be drowned and give no more trouble. But in less than half a minute I was ashamed of that idea, and remembered how she was vexed to think that even a loach should lose his life. And then I said to myself, now surely she would value me more than 1,000 loaches, and what she said must be quite true about the way out of this horrible place. Therefore I began to search with the utmost care and diligence, although my teeth were chattering, and all my bones beginning to ache with the chilliness and the wetness. Before very long the moon appeared, over the edge of the mountain, and among the trees at the top of it. And then I espied rough steps, and rocky, made as if with a sledge-hammer, narrow, steep, and far asunder, scooped here and there in the side of the entrance, and then round a bulge of the cliff, like the marks upon a great brown loaf, where a hungry child has picked at it. And higher up, where the light of the moon shone broader upon the precipice, there seemed to be a rude broken track, like the shadow of a crooked stick thrown upon a house wall. Herein was small encouragement, and at first I was minded to lie down and die, but it seemed to come amiss to me. God has his time for all of us, but he seems to advertise us when he does not mean to do it. Moreover, I saw a movement of lights at the head of the valley, as if lanthorns were coming after me, and the nimbleness given thereon to my heels was in front of all meditation. Straightway I set foot in the lowest stirrup, as I might almost call it, and clung to the rock with my nails, and worked to make a jump into the second stirrup. And I compassed that too, with the aid of my stick, although to tell you the truth I was not at that time of life so agile as boys of smaller frame are, for my size was growing beyond my years, and the muscles not keeping time with it, and the joints of my bones not closely hinged, with staring at one another. But the third step-hole was the hardest of all, and the rock swelled out on me over my breast, and there seemed to be no attempting it, until I espied a good stout rope hanging in a groove of shadow, and just managed to reach the end of it. How I clomb up, and across the clearing, and found my way home through the Bagworthy forest, is more than I can remember now, for I took all the rest of it then as a dream, by reason of perfect weariness. And indeed it was quite beyond my hopes to tell so much as I have told, for at first beginning to set it down, it was all like a mist before me. Nevertheless some parts grew clearer, as one by one I remembered them, having taken a little soft cordial, because the memory frightens me. For the toil of the water, and danger of labouring up the long cascade or rapids, and then the surprise of the fair young maid, and terror of the murderers, and desperation of getting away, all these things are much to me even now, when I am a stout churchwarden, and sit by the side of my fire, after going through many far worse adventures, which I will tell, God willing. Only the labour of writing is such, especially so as to construe and challenge a reader on parts of speech, and hope to be even with him, that by this pipe which I hold in my hand I ever expect to be beaten, as in the days when old Dr. Twiggs, if I made a bad stroke in my exercise, shouted aloud with a sour joy, John Ridd, sirrah, down with your small clothes!" Let that be as it may, I deserved a good beating that night, after making such a fool of myself, and grinding good fustian to pieces. But when I got home, all the supper was in, and the men sitting at the white table, and mother and Annie and Lizzie near by, all eager, and offering to begin, except indeed my mother, who was looking out at the doorway. And by the fire was Betty Muxworthy, scolding and cooking and tasting her work, all in a breath, as a man would say. I looked through the door from the dark by the wood stack, and was half of a mind to stay out like a dog, for fear of the rating and reckoning. But the way my dear mother was looking about, and the browning of the sausages got the better of me. But nobody could get out of me where I had been all the day and evening, although they worried me never so much, and longed to shake me to pieces, especially Betty Muxworthy, who never could learn to let well alone. Not that they made me tell any lies, although it would have served them right almost for intruding on other people's business; but that I just held my tongue, and ate my supper rarely, and let them try their taunts and jibes, and drove them almost wild after supper by smiling exceedingly knowingly. And indeed I could have told them things, as I hinted once or twice, and then poor Betty and our little Lizzie were so mad with eagerness, that between them I went into the fire, being thoroughly overcome with laughter and my own importance. Now what the working of my mind was, if indeed it worked at all, and did not rather follow suit of body, it is not in my power to say; only that the result of my adventure in the Doone glen was to make me dream a good deal of nights, which I had never done much before, and to drive me, with tenfold zeal and purpose, to the practice of bullet shooting. Not that I ever expected to shoot the Doone family, one by one, or even desired to do so, for my nature is not revengeful; but that it seemed to be somehow my business to understand the gun, as a thing I must be at home with. I could hit the barn door now capitally well with the Spanish matchlock, and even with John Fry's blunderbuss, at 10 good land yards distance, without any rest for my fusel. And what was very wrong of me, though I did not see it then, I kept John Fry there, to praise my shots, from dinner time often until the grey dusk, while he all the time should have been at work spring ploughing upon the farm. And for that matter so should I have been, or at any rate driving the horses; but John was by no means loath to be there, instead of holding the plough-tail. And indeed one of our old sayings is, "For pleasure's sake I would liefer wet, Than ha' 10 lumps of gold for each one of my sweat." Again, which is not a bad proverb, though unthrifty and unlike a Scotsman's, "God makes the wheat grow greener, While farmer be at his dinner." And no Devonshire man, or Somerset either, and I belong to both of them, ever thinks of working harder than God likes to see him. Nevertheless, I worked hard at the gun; and by the time that I had sent all the church roof gutters, so far as I honestly could cut them, through the red pine door, I began to long for a better tool that would make less noise and throw straighter. But the sheep shearing came, and the hay season next, and then the harvest of small corn, and the digging of the root called batata, a new but good thing in our neighbourhood, which our folks have made into taties; and then the sweating of the apples, and the turning of the cider press, and the stacking of the firewood, and netting of the woodcocks, and the springles to be minded in the garden and by the hedgerows, where blackbirds hop to the molehills in the white October mornings, and grey birds come to look for snails at the time when the sun is rising. It is wonderful how time runs away, when all these things and a great many others come in to load him down the hill, and prevent him from stopping to look about. And I for my part can never conceive how people who live in towns and cities, where neither lambs nor birds are, except in some shop windows, nor growing corn, nor meadow grass, nor even so much as a stick to cut or a stile to climb and sit down upon, how these poor folk get through their lives without being utterly weary of them, and dying from pure indolence, is a thing God only knows, if his mercy allows him to think of it. How the year went by I know not, only that I was abroad all day, shooting, or fishing, or minding the farm, or riding after some stray beast, or away by the seaside below Glenthorne, wondering at the great waters, and resolving to go for a sailor. For in those days I had a firm belief, as many other strong boys have, of being born for a seaman. And indeed I had been in a boat nearly twice, but the second time mother found it out, and came and drew me back again, and after that she cried so badly, that I was forced to give my word to her to go no more without telling her. But Betty Muxworthy spoke her mind quite in a different way about it, the while she was wringing my hosen and clattering to the drying horse. "Zailor is fey, and zarven right. Her can't kape out o' the water here, where I must go vor to Vanden, and zame as a girt to ed squallopin, and mucks up till I be wore out, I be, with the very sate is breeches. How will un ever bade aboard ship, with the water zinging out under'n, and coming up splash when the wind blow? Lotten go, missus, lotten go, say I, for wan, and old Davy wash his clouts for un." And this discourse of Betty's tended more than my mother's prayers, I fear, to keep me from going. For I hated Betty in those days, as children always hate a cross servant, and often get fond of a false one. But Betty, like many active women, was false by her crossness only, thinking it just for the moment perhaps, and rushing away with a bucket, ready to stick to it like a clenched nail if beaten the wrong way with argument, but melting over it, if you left her, as stinging soap, left along in a basin, spreads all abroad without bubbling. But all this is beyond the children, and beyond me too for that matter, even now in ripe experience. For I never did know what women mean, and never shall except when they tell me, if that be in their power. Now let that question pass. For although I am now in a place of some authority, I have observed that no one ever listens to me when I attempt to lay down the law. But all are waiting with open ears until I do enforce it. And so, methinks, he who reads a history cares not much for the wisdom or folly of the writer, knowing well that the former is far less than his own, and the latter vastly greater; but hurries to know what the people did, and how they got on about it. And this I can tell, if any one can, having been myself in the thick of it. The fright I had taken that night in Glen Doone satisfied me for a long time thereafter; and I took good care not to venture even in the fields and woods of the outer farm, without John Fry for company. John was greatly surprised and pleased at the value I now set upon him; until, what betwixt the desire to vaunt and the longing to talk things over, I gradually laid bare to him nearly all that had befallen me, except, indeed, about Lorna, whom a sort of shame kept me from mentioning. Not that I did not think of her, and wish very often to see her again; but of course I was only a boy as yet, and therefore inclined to despise young girls, as being unable to do anything, and only meant to listen to orders. And when I got along with the other boys, that was how we always spoke of them, if we deigned to speak at all, as beings of a lower order, only good enough to run errands for us, and to nurse boy babies. And yet my sister Annie was in truth a great deal more to me than all the boys of the parish, and of Brendon and Countisbury put together; although at the time I never dreamed it, and would have laughed if told so. Annie was of pleasing face, and very gentle manner, almost like a lady, some people said; but without any airs whatever, only trying to give satisfaction. And if she failed, she would go and weep, without letting any one know it, believing the fault to be all her own, when mostly it was of others. But if she succeeded in pleasing you, it was beautiful to see her smile, and stroke her soft chin in a way of her own, which she always used when taking note how to do the right thing again for you. And then her cheeks had a bright clear pink, and her eyes were as blue as the sky in spring; and she stood as upright as a young apple tree; and no one could help but smile at her, and pat her brown curls approvingly; whereupon she always curtsied. For she never tried to look away when honest people gazed at her; and even in the courtyard she would come and help to take your saddle, and tell, without you asking her, what there was for dinner. And afterwards she grew up to be a very comely maiden, tall and with a well-built neck, and very fair white shoulders under a bright cloud of curling hair. Alas, poor Annie, like most of the gentle maidens, but tush, I am not come to that yet. And for the present she seemed to me little to look at, after the beauty of Lorna Doone. End of chapter 9. Recording by Michelle Harris.
Chapter 10 of Lorna Doone. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Daisy 55. Lorna Doone by Aura D. Blackmore. Chapter 10. A brave rescue and a rough ride. It happened upon a November evening, when I was about 15 years old and outgrowing my strength very rapidly, my sister Annie being turned 13, and a deal of rain having fallen, and all the troughs in the yard being flooded, and the bark from the wood ricks washed down the gutters, and even our water shooting going brown, that the ducks in the court made a terrible quacking, instead of marching off to their pen, one behind another. Thereupon Annie and I ran out to see what might be the sense of it. There were 13 ducks, and 10 lily white, as the fashion then of ducks was. Not, I mean, 23 in all, but 10 white and 3 brown striped ones. And without being nice about their color, they all quacked very movingly. They pushed their gold-colored bills here and there, yet dirty as gold is apt to be, and they jumped on the triangles of their feet, and sounded out of their nostrils. And some of the overexcited ones ran along low on the ground, quacking grievously with their bills snapping and bending, and the roof of their mouths exhibited. Annie began to cry, "Dilly, dilly, eeny, eeny, ducksy," according to the burden of a tune they seemed to have accepted as the national duck's anthem. But instead of being soothed by it, they only quacked 3 times as hard and ran around till we were giddy. And then they shook their tails together and looked grave and went round and round again. Now I am uncommonly fond of ducks, both roasted and roasting and roasting, and it is a fine sight to behold them walk, parting one after another, and their toes out, like soldiers drilling, and their little eyes cocked all ways at once, and the way that they did with their bills, and dabble and throw up their heads and enjoy something, and then tell the others about it. Therefore I knew at once by the way they were carrying on that there must be something or other gone wholly amiss in the duck world. Sister Annie perceived it too, but with a greater quickness, for she counted them like a good duck wife, and could only tell 13 of them, when she knew there ought to be 14. And so we began to search about, and the ducks ran to lead us all right, having come that far to fetch us. And when we got down to the foot of the courtyard, where the 2 great ash trees stand by the side of the little water, we found good reason for the urgence and melancholy of the duck birds. Lo, the old white drake, the father of all, a bird of high manners and chivalry, always the last to help himself from the pan of barley meal, and the first to show fight to a dog or cock intruding upon his family. This fine fellow and pillar of the state was now in a sad predicament, yet quacking very stoutly. For the brook wherewith he had been familiar from his callow childhood, and wherein he was wont for quests for water newts, and tadpoles, and caddisworms, and other game, this brook, which afforded him very often scantly space to dabble in, and sometimes starve the cresses, was now coming down in a great brown flood, as if the banks never belonged to it. The foaming of it, and the noise, and the cresting of the corners, and the up and down like a wave of the sea, were enough to frighten any duck, though bred upon stormy waters, which our ducks have been. There is always a hurdle 6 feet long and 4½ in depth, swung by a chain at either end from an oak laid across the channel. And the use of this hurdle is to keep our kine at milking time from straying away from their drinking. For in truth they are very dainty, and to fence strange cattle, or Farmer Snow's horses, from coming along the bed of the brook unknown, to steal our substance. But now this hurdle, which hung in the summer a foot above the trickle, would have been dipped more than 2 feet deep but for the power against it. For the turn came down so vehemently that the chains at full stretch were creaking, and the hurdle buffeted almost flat and thatchy, so to say, and the drift stuff was going seesaw with a silky splash on the dirty red comb of the waters. But saddest to see was between 2 bars, where a fog was of rushes and flood wood, and wild celery, hullum, and dead cross foot. Who but our venerable Mallard, jammed in by the joint of his shoulders, speaking aloud as he rose and fell with his top knot full of water, unable to comprehend it, with his tail washed away from him, but often compelled to be silent, being ducked very harshly against his will by the choking fall of the hurdle. For a moment I could not help laughing, because being borne up high and dry by a tumult of the torrent, he gave me a look from his one little eye, having lost one in fight with a turkey cock, a gaze of appealing sorrow, and then a loud quack to second it. But the quack came out of time, I suppose, for his throat got filled with water as the hurdle carried him back again. And then there was scarcely the screw of his tail to be seen until he swung up again, and left small doubt by the way he spluttered, and fell to quack, and hung down his poor crest, but what he must drown in another minute, and frogs triumph over his body. Annie was crying, and wringing her hands, and I was about to rush into the water, although I liked not the look of it, but hoped to hold on by the hurdle, when a man on horseback came suddenly around the corner of the great ash hedge on the other side of the stream, and his horse's feet were in the water. "Hold there!" he cried. "Get thee back, boy. The flood will carry thee down like a straw. I will do it for ye, and no trouble." With that he leaned forward and spoke to his mare. She was just of the tint of a strawberry, a young thing, very beautiful, and she arched up her neck, as misliking the job, yet trusting him would attempt it. She entered the flood with her dainty forelegs slopped forward and further in front of her, and her delicate ears pricked forward, and the size of her great eyes increasing. But he kept her straight in the turbid rush, by the pressure of his knee on her. Then she looked back and wondered at him, as the force of the torrent grew stronger, but he bade her go on, and on she went, and it foamed up over her shoulders, and she tossed up her lip and scorned it, for now her courage was wakening. Then as the rush of it swept her away, and she struck with her 4 feet down the stream, he leaned from his saddle in a manner which I never could have thought possible, and caught her with old Tom with his left hand, and set him between his holsters, and smiled at his faint quack of gratitude. In a moment all these were carried down stream, and the rider lay flat on his horse, and tossed the hurdle clear from him, and made for the bend of smooth water. They landed some 30 or 40 yards low, in the midst of our kitchen garden, where the winter cabbage was. But though Annie and I crept in through the hedge, and were full of our thanks and admiring him, he would answer us never a word, until he had spoken in full to the mare, as if explaining the whole to her. "Sweetheart, I know thou could have leaped it," he said, as he patted her cheek, being on the ground by this time, and she was nudging up to him with the water pattering off of her. "But I had a good reason, Winnie dear, for making thee go through it." She answered him kindly with her soft eyes, and smiled at him very lovingly, and they understood one another. Then he took from his waistcoat 2 peppercorns, and made the old drake swallow them, and tried him softly upon his legs, where the leading gap in the hedge was. Old Tom stood up quite bravely, and clapped his wings, and shook off the wet from his tail feathers, and then away into the courtyard, and his family gathered round him, and they all made a noise in their throats, and stood up and put their bills together to thank God for this great deliverance. Having taken all this trouble, and watched the end of that adventure, the gentleman turned round to us with a pleasant smile on his face, as if he were lightly amused with himself, and we came up and looked at him. He was rather short, about John Fry's height, or maybe be a little taller, but very strongly built and springy, as his gait at every step showed plainly, although his legs were bowed with much riding, and he looked as if he lived on horseback. To a boy like me he seemed very old, being over 20, and well found in beard, but he was not more than 24, fresh and ruddy looking, with a short nose and keen blue eyes, and a merry waggish jerk about him, as if the world were not in earnest. Yet he had a sharp, stern way, like the crack of a pistol, if anything misliked him, and we knew, for children see such things, that it was safer to trickle than buffet him. "Well, young uns, what be gapping at?" He gave Annie a chuck on the chin, and took me all in without winking. "Your mare," I said, standing stoutly up, being a tall boy now. "I never saw such a beauty, sir. Will you let me have a ride of her?" "Think thou couldst ride her, lad? She will have no burden but mine. Thou couldn't never ride her. Tch! I'll be low to kill thee." "Ride her!" I cried with a bravest scorn, for she looked so kind and gentle. "There never was horse upon Exmoor foal but I could tackle in half an hour, only I never ride upon saddle. Take them leathers off of her." He looked at me with a dry little whistle, and thrust his hand into his breeches pockets, and so grinned that I could not stand it. And Annie laid hold of me in such a way that I was almost mad at her, and he laughed and approved of her for doing so. And the worst of all was, he said nothing. "Get away, Annie, will you? Do you think I'm a fool, good sir? Only trust me with her, and I will not override her. For that I will go bail, my son. She is liker to override thee, but the ground is soft to fall upon, after all this rain. Now come on out into the yard, young man, for the sake of your mother's cabbages. And the mellow strawberry will be softer for thee, since pride must have its fall. I am thy mother's cousin, boy, and I'm going up the house. Tom Faggus is my name, as everybody knows, and this is my young mare, Winnie." What a fool I must have been not to know it at once. Tom Faggus, the great highwayman, and his young blood mare, the Strawberry. Already her fame was noised abroad, nearly as much as her master's, and my longing to ride her grew tenfold, but fear came at the back of it. Not that I had the smallest fear of what the mare could do to me, by fair play and horse trickery, but that the glory of sitting upon her seemed to be too great for me, especially as there were rumours abroad that she was not a mare after all, but a witch. However, she looked like a filly all over, and wonderfully beautiful, with her supple stride, and soft slope of shoulder, and glossy coat, beaded with water, and prominent eyes full of docile fire. Whether this came from her eastern blood of the Arabs newly imported, and whether the cream colour mixed with our bay led to that bright strawberry tint, is certainly more than I can decide, being chiefly acquainted with farm horses, and these come of any color and form. You never can count what they will be, and are lucky to get 4 legs to 'em. Mr. Faggus gave his mare a wink, and she walked demurely after him, a bright young thing, flowing over with light, yet dropping her soul to a high one, and led by love to anything, as the manner is of females when they know what is the best for them. Then Winnie trod lightly upon the straw, because it had soft muck under it, and her delicate feet came back again. "Up for a steer, boy, be ye?" Tom Faggus stopped, and the mare stopped there, and they looked at me provokingly. "Is she able to leap, sir? There is good take off on this side of the brook." Mr. Faggus laughed very quietly, turning around to Winnie so that she might enter into it, and she, for her part, seemed to know exactly where the fun lay. "Good tumble off, you mean, boy? Well, there can be small harm to thee. I'm akin to the family, and know the substance of their skulls." "Let me get up," I said, waxing wroth, for reasons I cannot tell you, because they are too manifold. "Take off your saddlebags things. I will try not to squeeze the ribs in, unless she plays nonsense with me." Then Mr. Faggus was up on his mettle, at this proud speech of mine, and John Fry was running up all the while, and Bill Dadds, and half a dozen. Tom Faggus gave one glance around, and then dropped all regard for me. The high repute of his mare was at stake, and what was my life compared to it? Through my defiance and stupid ways, here was I in a duel, and my legs not come to their strength yet, and my arms as limp as a herring. Something of this occurred to him even in his wrath for me, for he spoke very softly to the filly, who now could scarce subdue herself, but she drew in her nostrils, and breathed to his breath, and did all she could do to answer him. "Not too hard, my dear," he said. "Let him gently down on the mixen. That'll be quite enough." Then he turned the saddle off, and I was up in a moment. She began at first so easily, and prickled her ears so lovingly, and minced about as if pleased to find so light a weight upon her, that I thought she knew I could ride a little, and feared to show any capers. "Gee wool, Polly!" cried I, for all the men were now looking on, being then at the leaving off time. "Gee woolly, Polly, and show what thou be made of." With that I plugged my heels into her, and Billy Dawes flung his hat up. Nevertheless, she outraged not, though her eyes were frightening. Annie and John Fry took a pick to keep himself safe, but she curbed to and fro, her strong forearms rising like springs in gather, waiting and quivering grievously, and beginning to sweat about it. Then her master gave a shrill clear whistle, when her ears were bent forwards him, and I felt her form beneath me gathering up like whalebone, and her hind legs coming under me, and I knew that I was in for it. First she reared upright in the air, and struck me full on the nose with her comb, till I bled worse than Robert Snail made me, and then down with her 4 feet deep in the straw, and her hind feet going to heaven. Finding me stick to her still like wax, for my mettle was up as hers was, away she flew with me swifter than ever I went before, or since I throw. She drove full head at the corbel. "Oh, Jack, slip off!" screamed Annie. Then she turned like light, when I thought to crush her, and ground my left knee against it. "Max me!" I cried, for my breeches were broken, and short words went the furthest. "If you kill me, you shall die with me." Then she took the courtyard gate at a leap, knocking my words between my teeth, and then right over a quick-set hedge, as if the sky was a breath to her and away for the watermelons, while I lay on her neck like a child at the breast and wished I had never been born. Straightway, all in the front of the wind, and scattering clouds around her, all I knew of the speed we made was the frightful flash of her shoulders and her mane like trees in a tempest. I felt the earth under us rushing away, and the air left far behind us, and my breath came and went, and I prayed to God, and was sorry to be so late of it. All the long swift while, without power or thought, I clung to her crest and shoulders, and dug my nails into her cresses, and my toes into her flank part, and was proud of holding on so long, though sure of being beaten. Then in her fury at feeling me still, she rushed at another device for it, and leaped the wide water trough sideways across to and fro till no breath was left in me. The hazel barks took me too hard in the face, and the tall dog briers got hold of me, and the ache of my back was like crimping a fish, till I longed to give up, thoroughly beaten, and lie there and die in the cresses. For there came a shrill whistle from up the home hill, where the people had hurried to watch us, and the mare stopped as if a bullet, then set off for home with the speed of a swallow, and going as smoothly and silently. I never had dreamed of such delicate motion, fluent, and graceful, and ambient, soft as the breeze flitting over the flowers, but swift as the summer lightning. I sat up again, but my strength was all spent, and no time left to recover it, and though she rose at our gate like a bird, I tumbled off into the mixen. End of chapter 10. Recording by Daisy 55.